With the elections in Saxony and Thuringia now behind us, we do have to focus on the elections in Brandenburg, which will take place on the 22nd of September, a couple weeks from now. And what is important to note is, despite the fact that the elections in Saxony and Thuringia are over, the current formation of a government, the coalition talks, are not. And that will have some impact on the results in Brandenburg because if parties change their promises that they made to their voters or change some of their policy positions, that could have an impact on Brandenburg. And the voters in Brandenburg will be looking to some extent to what happens in Saxony and Thuringia, what kind of governments can be formed, who is going to work with who, and see if any promises were broken after the election. And we do have some polling now for Brandenburg after these results. Two polls in particular I want to take a look at today to kind of give a picture of what's going to happen in Brandenburg when they have their state election. Now, what I first want to do is give a recap of the possible coalitions in Saxony and Thuringia to kind of get a view of what is going to happen unfold over the next couple of months and see if we get a coalition government in either states or a minority government, and of course, what type. Now, parties in both states and across Germany have ruled out working with the AfD. So they are a large bloc. They are the largest in Thuringia and second largest in Saxony, but they, as of now, are not playing any part in coalition talks. The AfD has asked the BSV and the CDU to invited them to coalition talks and has been open to working with them, but of course, it doesn't go both ways. The CDU and the BSV have, until now and still as of now, ruled out working with the AfD. So if we start with Saxony, we see, of course, the CDU is the largest party. Not by far. They are, only one seat ahead of the AfD, but the AfD doesn't have any allies, any party to form a coalition. So it is pretty much clear that the CDU will almost certainly be leading this next government, with Michael Kretschmer, the incumbent governor, retaining position, being elected governor for another 5 years, assuming the government survives and there's no snap elections. Now, the incumbent government of SPD and Greens fell below their majority. They did not win re-election, and Michael Kretschmer has spoken out against working with the Greens. There is kind of tension between them within the coalition. Now, the most likely one, at least one that's talked about kind of regularly, is a coalition between the CDU, the SPD, and the BSV. Now, there was an alleged agreement between the BSV and the CDU that the BSV would support the CDU and elect Kretschmer in Saxony, and in turn, the CDU would elect Katja Wolf as the governor for the BSV in Thuringia. This, of course, is not finalized or nor certain. Nothing yet is really certain of what will happen, but this is one of the possible coalitions, and it is somewhat probable. Now, the SPD and the BSV are going to have some issues. The BSV is kind of still a taboo. Now, the CDU officially does not want to work with Die Linke. They have a kind of non-cooperation agreement with both the AfD and Die Linke. Now, the fact that the BSV split away from Die Linke means that the party is not officially on that list. However, many of the reasons why the CDU was incompatible with Die Linke was on their positions, and of course their past connection to East Germany and the communist government, and the BSV still has many of that. So there are many people in the CDU that have come out against working with the BSV. There are some politicians, even in the eastern states, that say that they do not want cooperation with the BSV and the CDU. However, as we can see here, it's pretty much impossible. The SPD the FDP is not in the parliament. The Greens and the SPD, even if you add the one seat from the Free Voters, that does not reach a majority. So the CDU, if they are not going to work with the AfD, they have to work with either Die Linke or the BSV, and both are going to be problematic. As of now, I would say it's possible for a CDU, SPD, BSV government to form a coalition, but still, there has to be the talks. And even for the BSV, this might be problematic because a lot of their voters are more populist, left-wing voters. Some of the voters from the BSV actually were potentially going to vote for the AfD if they did not become a party. And so if the voters in Brandenburg see the BSV forming a coalition with the CDU without major concessions, then we could see the BSV bleed a few points in support to the AfD in Brandenburg. And that's why this matters. That's why the formation of a government coalition here matters, or the coalition talks, because as the parties start to change their positions after the election in one state, well, the voters in Brandenburg might start to see that and kind of change who they're going to vote for. But as of now, I would say the CDU, SPD, BSV coalition is, of the majority coalitions, the most likely. It's also, BSV and Die Linke and CDU have a majority, but this is completely unorthodox, and this would be very problematic for all parties involved. We could also have a minority government. We could even have a CDU minority government led by the SPD, with support and supplying confidence, where the SPD and the BSV will not be officially part of the government, but they will support the legislation of the CDU with some concessions. Now, Kretschmer has said he does not want a minority government, but it is very difficult, and so there's really nothing that can be certain. There are some people in the CDU that have spoken out, kind of offered or spoken in favor of working with the AfD, at least on a minority level, but that is still only a few cases, and definitely not a majority in the party. So as of now, I would say there's going to be talks between the CDU and the BSV. And if both parties can come to an agreement, then this will be a likely coalition formed in both states. But as of now, it is not certain, and there are a lot of problems that the parties have to overcome in the coalition talk phase. Now, in Thuringia, it is somewhat similar. The CDU and the SPD and the BSV are at 44 seats. This would be a likely coalition. However, they fell one seat short. Now, Bodo Ramelow, the governor from Die Linke, said, of course, he has maintained his seat. He has said that he is going to work with whatever parties possible to prevent the AfD from coming to power. So he has said that if a CDU, SPD, BSV government is something that can be formed between the parties, he will use his seat to support them. And so we could have a minority government of CDU, SPD, BSV supported by a few politicians from Die Linke, or you could also in turn have a coalition of the CDU, BSV, and Die Linke. This is going to be, this is the one that has a majority. If you want to have a majority, official majority government without the AfD, this is what it has to be: CDU, BSV, and Die Linke. Now, of course, it's a problem because even if the BSV and Die Linke are similar, they did split away from each other on issues. They are similar. They were once in the same party, so technically they could form a coalition together and work past their differences. However, because of the split, there's a lot of more personal issues. Even if they're not on the actual political issues, there is a divide. Some of the people in Die Linke might see the BSV as traitors, as people that betrayed the party. And so there is a lot of anger kind of between the two groups. And it's not even certain if the BSV and Die Linke would be able to work with each other on a personal level, yet alone on actually policy. The CDU, of course, has been a party of reunification. Helmut Kohl has been a kind of neoliberal center-right party. Them working with both the BSV and Die Linke, which are kind of seen as two variations of the old, communist East Germany, is going to be problematic. And there's a lot of people in the base that are going to be angry with that. A lot of voters. There's not a majority of voters that want to work with the AfD or the SPD or really any way, but there are a lot of voters in the CDU that are against working with the BSV and Die Linke. So if they try and do this, it will be definitely a problem. But we'll have to see on the coalition talks. Of course, this is the only alliance, the only coalition that can be formed with a majority without the AfD. So if we see this form, this could end up hurting both parties and helping the AfD more, but we'll have to see in the coalition talks ahead. Now, lastly, of course, I want to talk about Brandenburg. And we do have two new polls out from Infratest DMAP and Institut Wahlkreisprognose. Most of the polling agencies are pretty reliable, pretty in line with each other. There's not too much of a difference. So this is, of course, the average of those two new polls. There were polls before the elections in Saxony and Thuringia, but those have moved out of the aggregate, so this is the aggregate of the two newest polls we've had over the past week. And as we can see, the AfD is in a strong position to win this election. They are polling at around 28.5% of the vote, clearly ahead in first place, almost as strong as they are in Saxony and Thuringia, and around 6-7 points ahead of the SPD, which has won every election until now, or at least in the polling. The SPD has won every Brandenburg state election since 1990. This is also the party of the incumbent governor, Dietmar Woidke. And what's interesting also about Brandenburg is, Woidke has stated that if the SPD loses and the AfD wins first place, he will step down as governor. He will resign, kind of step back from politics to some degree, and that will be a big defeat for the SPD, because this means that the unpopularity of the federal government has brought down one of their strong, popular governors in one of the SPD's strongest states. And so this will be a very big symbolic defeat for the SPD, even if they come in second place over 20%. Decades ago, the SPD was much stronger here, even in the mid-90s, polling at around 50-60%, running the state on their own. So this will be a big defeat. And what's also interesting is there's a lot of pressure because of that on the federal government. And there is some talk that if the SPD does poorly here, we could see a collapse of the federal government in Berlin, because the SPD in every single state knows that no matter what they do, the unpopularity of the SPD, of the Ampel coalition, the traffic light coalition in Berlin, is dragging the party down. And so there might be pressure on Scholz to pull out of the coalition, or even the Greens, and we could see maybe a collapse of the federal coalition and new elections on a federal level. Now, of course, that's not guaranteed, but it is possible. If the SPD does very badly here and the AfD wins, we could see maybe the SPD and the Scholz government collapse, and we could have early elections for the Bundestag before they are planned for September of 2025. Of course, not guaranteed, but it's very possible and shouldn't be ruled out completely. We have the CDU and the BSV both around 15%. They will be, at moderate positions. Neither of them have really a chance to vie for first or second place at this point. I think that the personality of Woidke as governor will help the SPD to maintain second place. But of course, the CDU and the BSV will play an important role in the formation of a coalition government. Now, the Greens are at 5%. They could potentially fall out, and Die Linke is expected to fall out as well. So we see a kind of similar result in line with what the East German states are. But of course, if the AFD wins here, it is two things. It's one, another state where the AFD wins for the first time, and also it is a state that has voted for the SPD in every election. This will be the first time that the state does not go for the SPD. Now, the last thing is, of course, we had a lot of talk over the past few days with these elections over what is the 1/3 majority that the AFD can achieve. And this is the idea that if the AFD achieves a third of the seats in the legislature, they can prevent constitutional reform. Because, of course, certain laws, you need a 2/3 majority to get through the Landtag. And if the AFD has over a third of the seats, they can prevent that. And so there is a possibility that that could happen in this state. It happened in Thuringia. They were one seat off in Saxony. So if the AFD is able to achieve, I believe, 30 seats here in Brandenburg, then that will be a Sperrminorität for them, which will give them some power and influence in the Landtag as well. Now, one important thing to note for Brandenburg is the calculation of the seats. Now, the way the German elections work is if you win a direct mandate or direct district, you win that seat no matter what. However, there are instances where a party can win more direct districts than they're allocated through the popular vote. So if a party wins 20% of the vote, they would get out of 100 seats 20. But if a party wins more direct mandates than seats they should have, they can't take the seats away, so they give seats to other parties. And this is the case in Brandenburg. However, there is a limit. The Brandenburg Landtag is 88 seats, and it can go up to 110. Now, what is, of course, in one of the polls in Institute Wahlkreisprognose, they post the actual map, and we see the AFD is on track to win 37 direct mandates. Now, this means the AFD will not get 37 out of 88. They will get 37 out of 110 because this is, of course, this 37 seats is more than they're going to get. Now, with the poll, they're expected to get 30% of the vote and 37 seats. Now, that is more than they should based on proportional representation. So what happens is an extra 20, 30 seats go to the other parties. But like I said, there is a limit of 110. And that means that it's possible for the AFD to get one or two more seats than they normally would if there was no limit. And 37 out of 110 is what the AFD needs to win that Sperrminorität. So either the AFD can win around 30% and the Greens fall below and they get enough seats, or if they win 37 direct mandates, which is possible according to this map, they will automatically have it no matter what. So, of course, very interesting to see. The map also plays into effect if the free voters win one direct mandate, they will enter in the parliament. In Brandenburg, it's similar to Saxony, but of course, the parties only require one direct mandate to enter in proportionally. This means if a party wins a direct mandate, it can get seats through proportional representation, even if it falls below 5%. This was the case for the Greens. They won in Potsdam 2. Now, they won over 5% of the vote, but of course, in the polls, we see they're at 5.3. Now, if they fall below 5% and they manage to win the district in Potsdam, they will end up winning 4 or 5 seats through proportional representation. However, if they fall below that, then they will have to reach the 5% threshold. Now, for the free voters, this is the same. They have one district they won in 2019. They are likely going to hold it, and that means that even if the free voters fall below 5%, they will still win that direct mandate, and of course, 1 or 2 or 3 for that 3%. So, of course, we'll probably have some more polls for Brandenburg over the next couple of weeks, and I will cover those. So this will be a very important election, another of the East German states, and this will be the final one. And so I wanted to give this update to see how the election is looking 2 weeks out, and we'll, of course, do some more videos as we get closer. So I hope you all enjoyed this video. If you do, please like, share, subscribe, and I will see you all in the next one. Thank you for watching.